Many people think of the 1960s as the beginning of the Troubles, but the Irish Republican Army's roots and activities stretch well before then. While several resistance groups existed in the 19th century, the IRA became the Army of the Revolutionary Irish Republic, as declared by its Dáil Éireann in 1919. For British audiences, the IRA came onto the radar during the civil rights movement in Northern Ireland in the late 1960s. That was the first time the British media really began reporting on Northern Ireland and the IRA. Before that, British newspapers rarely covered the issue, and politicians avoided discussing it. In the late 1990s in the UK, the BBC and other major British press selectively reported on Northern Ireland affairs and politics. Gerry Adams, associated with the IRA and Sinn Féin, appeared in the papers, often depicted as a solemn, bearded man carrying a coffin. And his voice wasn't allowed to be broadcast. Adams, a prolific writer, faced bans on his publications in England. It wasn't until after 2000 that British audiences first heard his voice on British television and read articles exploring his personal stories. Around this time, the first St. Patrick's Day celebration in London was held, thanks to Ken Livingstone. The British media's selective reporting on Northern Ireland is no secret. If you're interested in diving deeper, there are excellent resources available. A particularly insightful read is the BBC's Irish Troubles, Television, Conflict, and Northern Ireland by Robert Savage, shedding light on the complexities of the conflict coverage. The Irish Civil War lasted from June 1922 to May 1923, a heartbreaking chapter in Ireland's history. It was a conflict between the Provisional Government of Ireland, supported by the British government, and the anti-treaty Irish Republican Army over the Anglo-Irish Treaty, seen as a betrayal by some. Michael Collins, leader of the Provisional Government, was killed by anti-treaty forces. This war was excruciating because it pitted former comrades who had once fought side by side against Britain, against each other. The film The Wind That Shakes the Barley explores people's lives on both sides of the treaty debate. The IRA, officially founded in 1919, wasn't entirely new. It was the successor to earlier nationalist groups, like the Irish Republican Brotherhood, and grew out of the Irish Volunteers. These groups shared the same goal, freedom for Ireland, considering themselves freedom fighters and political prisoners when jailed. While the ultimate aim of Irish Republicans has always been the reunification of Ireland, their methods haven't always aligned with this goal. The IRA itself has never been a single, unified group, as splits have occurred over strategy, techniques, and tactics. During the Troubles, the IRA splintered into two main groups. The official IRA leaned towards political action and preferred using parliamentary tactics. The Provisional IRA, or Provos, believed that violence was a necessary means to achieve their goals. In the years leading up to the Good Friday Agreement in 1998, the Provisional IRA declared a ceasefire, marking a significant step toward peace. However, this didn't mean an end to divisions. A breakaway group, the Real IRA, emerged during this time. Other splinter groups include the Continuity IRA broke off from Sinn Féin/Provisional IRA in 1986 when Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness shifted Sinn Féin's approach to abandoning the party's policy of boycotting the Irish Parliament. This group became more active after the Provisional IRA's 1994 ceasefire. The new IRA was formed in 2012 as a continuation of the Real IRA. This group tragically gained attention in 2019 after the killing of journalist Lyra McKee in Belfast. While various groups have used the name IRA over time, their methods and philosophies have often differed significantly. It's a complex and emotional history that continues to shape Ireland today. Why did the IRA use bombs? It's a question that puzzles many people, even in the Republic of Ireland. Why did the IRA resort to such extreme violence? The situation is profoundly complex and rooted in history for those unfamiliar with the context. Many people think the IRA is a terrorist organization. The answer often depends on your perspective. For some, the IRA is labeled as a terrorist group or paramilitary group. For others, they are seen as freedom fighters. Before his involvement in political activities, Jerry Adams, a prominent Republican figure, was a trade unionist and civil rights activist. In fact, many Republicans actively participated in trade union efforts and the civil rights movement. They were among the founding members and supporters of the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association, a non-sectarian group in the 1960s. Education plays a significant role for imprisoned IRA members. During their time in jail, many dedicated themselves to intensive study, exploring topics like democracy and Irish history. This process is viewed as a vital part of their political education. Some even become fluent in Irish before their release. From their perspective, these individuals see themselves as political prisoners rather than common criminals. The IRA carried out bombings and attacks in British and Irish cities for decades. They are the Army, which means a paramilitary group or self-defense force. Anger and frustration were at the heart of their actions, particularly among Northern Ireland's Catholic community. They felt like second-class citizens, lacking the human and civil rights and quality of life enjoyed by others in Britain, despite Northern Ireland being part of the country. They lived surrounded by armed British soldiers and the police force. Nationalist people and Republicans were oppressed by their local authorities and the Special Powers Act, arrested and jailed without charge or trial. The IRA's goal was to pressure the British government to withdraw from Northern Ireland entirely. Lawyers and journalists who visited Northern Ireland during the late 1960s and early 1970s were shocked to find out that the situation was much worse than they had thought. Robert Fisk of The Independent, who reported extensively on the conflict, once said, "I always refer to Northern Ireland as a war and not the Troubles." That perspective underscores just how deeply entrenched and complicated this chapter of history really is. Today, the bombings have stopped, but the legacy of the IRA remains divisive. Many in the Republic of Ireland strongly disapprove of their violent methods. There are people from the South who are very critical of Republicans, and people from the North. It's not just about the violence. It's about how perspectives differ. For example, popular songs like Zombie by the Cranberries or U2's Sunday Bloody Sunday are about the Troubles and often evoke mixed reactions. While many in the South might connect with these songs, Northerners don't always share the same sentiment. It feels like they're not entirely on the same page, which speaks to the complexity of this issue. To understand this discrepancy better, it may be helpful to compare the IRA's evolution to how people think about communism. When most of us hear the word communism, we might think of oppressive regimes like those in Russia or North Korea. But that's not the whole story. The communist movement had very different beginnings. For instance, in Britain during the 1930s and 1940s, the Communist Party of Great Britain attracted a large number of intellectuals who genuinely wanted a fairer society. Their original aim was noble. They were the leaders of the left movement. Over time, though, the ideology took on very different forms. During the post-war years, many Irish Republicans were part of left-wing activities. Although many Republicans were skeptical about communism, communist members often participated in general left activities as trade unionists and civil rights activists. For example, Jerry Adams was an avid civil rights activist and trade unionist in the 1960s. The IRA evolved, becoming more than just one entity. The Republican Congress that was established in 1934 was a split group of left-wing IRA members. IRA members were not homogeneous. Some were progressive, while others were traditional, with different methods and strategies. Some independent Republicans and nationalists don't belong to any group. They simply support the broader Republican cause. Desmond Greaves, editor of the Irish Democrat who tried to politicize IRA members and Republicans, summed up this complexity well. He didn't condone violence, but he did support the IRA's goals. He wrote, "Behind every one of those bloody bombs is 800 years of history. That should be remembered, too." To him, and others like him, the IRA's violence was a byproduct of imperialism, a symptom of a much larger problem. To him, and others like him, the IRA's violence was a byproduct of imperialism, a symptom of a much larger problem. Why are the Northern Ireland conflicts and IRA members called the Troubles? The conflict in Northern Ireland during the early 20th century was typically known as the Troubles. The term is a euphemism for the violent political conflict. It was a truly challenging time for the British government. Foreign correspondents who reported from Belfast in the 1960s and 1970s often said the situation felt far worse than just troubles, but it was in fact a war zone. Unfortunately, the British government did not seem to grasp the seriousness of the situation until things started spiraling out of control. Here's an interesting story from that time. Brian Faulkner, who served as Northern Ireland's last Prime Minister from March 1971 to March 1972, took a drastic step to try to deal with the Troubles. He imprisoned people without trial. Obviously, this decision caused enormous consequences. On top of that, the military intelligence wasn't up to scratch. The files from the Royal Ulster Constabulary Special Branch were outdated, which meant they were arresting the wrong people while missing the main suspects entirely. British journalist Peter Taylor interviewed a young officer called Jonathan, who shared some insight into the chaos of those days. "We were briefed to go to a whole series of houses and arrest known IRA men. And I have to say that many of the people we arrested were known, but had not been active since about 1922. I remember arresting one elderly gentleman who was well into his 80s who was rather proud to be arrested. He said, 'I'm delighted to think that I'm still a trouble to the British government, but I have to tell you I've not been active since the Easter Rising.' He had to be taken in, but no doubt he was released shortly afterwards." I think that a lot of these names had remained on files for decades and had never been removed. Once a Republican, always a Republican. The intelligence was very, very poor because the army hadn't built up its own store of intelligence by then, and we acted on the information we were given. You can imagine how much money Britain has been pouring into Northern Ireland's security needs. Why did the IRA stop bombing? The IRA's decision to stop bombing wasn't sudden. It was the result of a gradual shift in their approach and thinking. By the early 1990s, it was clear that the conflict had reached a stalemate. Neither the IRA nor the British Army could claim victory, and using violence was becoming less and less acceptable, both locally and internationally. Generations and public opinion had changed in Britain, Ireland, and Northern Ireland. People wanted peace, and international players like the US and the EU were encouraging dialogue rather than conflict. Although the IRA's bombings kept the British government aware of their demands, the effectiveness of such violence was being questioned, even within the IRA itself. Those involved in earlier campaigns, like the border campaign from 1956 to 1962, had little impact and failed. Also, surprisingly, it passed almost unnoticed in the British press. The IRA members realized they needed a different strategy if they wanted real change. This led the IRA to engage more actively in politics. They began serious discussions with groups like the Social Democratic and Labour Party, led by John Hume, as well as representatives from the Irish government and British politicians. Their goal was clear: all-party talks that could lead to peaceful conflict resolution. These efforts eventually bore fruit in 1998, when the Good Friday Agreement, also known as the Belfast Agreement, was signed. This landmark deal marked a turning point in Irish history and symbolized a move from violence toward a shared vision of peace. Fittingly, 1998 was also the bicentennial of the 1798 Irish Rebellion, making it a year of profound historical significance. So, what did the IRA accomplish? The Republican movement always came in waves during the period of turmoil. The IRA's history is complex and layered, as it was never a single, unified entity. It's also important to remember that the IRA wasn't the only group involved in the conflict. Protestant loyalist groups were equally armed and often brutal, while the political and legal system in Northern Ireland frequently targeted and jailed local Catholic people without justification. In this environment, the IRA believed they needed to protect their communities. Over the years, the Republican movement has evolved significantly. What counts as an accomplishment depends on how you define the term. While the armed struggle is largely a thing of the past, many former IRA members became politicized, shifting their focus to diplomacy and political action. Sinn Féin, once closely associated with the Republican cause, is now a major political force, working towards the same goals through democratic means. Slowly but steadily, they continue to pursue the vision of Irish reunification, though now through peaceful and political avenues.